hear Mary Kay Blakely as part of our Women's History Month celebration. Today we'll be hearing a presentation on the trivialization of women in magazines. And this evening, in this same room, Ms. Blakely will be our keynote speaker at 8 o'clock, and she will be doing a speech entitled, "So You're Not a Feminist, But," which sounds intriguing. So if you can make it to that, afterwards there will be a reception at the Women's Center and a book signing. Let me tell you a little bit about Ms. Blakely. Ms. Blakely is currently teaching at the New School for Social Research in New York City, and one of the conferences that she organized while working there was entitled "Let Them Read Fluff." You might have read her article entitled the same, which is dealing with the same topic that we're going to be hearing about today. Mary Kay Blakely is an author of a creative nonfiction book, which is entitled "Wake Me When It's Over," right here. And the bookstore back in the corner there is going to be selling copies, so if you want to pick up a copy for the signing later this evening, you're welcome to do that. The book was about an account of a 9-day coma that she experienced in 1984 and how that coma changed her life. Ms. Blakely has also written as a journalist for a lot of different magazines. To name a few: Ms., Cosmopolitan, Vogue, Life, the New York Times Book Review, Working Woman, and has appeared in the Hers column in the New York Times. Please help me with welcoming Mary Kay Blakely here today.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's good to be here. Well, this talk actually grew out of a grumbling meeting of Manhattan writers when we were all complaining about what happens to our work once it gets submitted into the editorial offices, and we decided that we would do a panel discussion because we were concerned about writers not being able to get certain issues into the magazines. These were women's magazines. There are so many important women's issues in the 70s, certainly in the 80s, even though it was largely invisible to many of us in the press. So we decided we would do this, and we presented the idea to the Women's Media Group, and they turned us down and said, "This will be too divisive. We don't want to have a fight between writers and editors about policy. We make the policy, you make the words." So then we decided we had to go with this story to the New School and put it on the cover of the Newsday Sunday magazine, and then we got their attention. I also thought it was a rather kamikaze move because we were talking about all of the magazines that then employed me, and thought that it was the end of my career. It was like a political suicide, except it didn't take. Well, when journalist Maggie Scarf stumbled upon the finding that women suffered depression 2 to 6 times as frequently as men, Marcia Gutentag, who was then director of mental health at the mental health program at Harvard University, began a study of the content of women's and men's magazines. And she found that while men's magazines were overwhelmingly preoccupied with mastery and triumph and achievement and accomplishment, women's magazines focused largely on the problem of loss of attractiveness, loss of effectiveness, and the message in women's magazines seemed to be, whatever it is that makes you happy, you are about to lose it. Well, as a writer whose own life included regular bouts of depression, I was very curious about what women's magazines might be doing to contribute to the overwhelming and pervasive depression that women felt. Some depressions certainly were normal and even necessary. They're the blue periods that follow some direct confrontation with a difficult truth, a truth which, when accepted, would require difficult changes in one's thinking and in one's behavior. Psychologists have labeled these learning experiences, and Virginia Woolf called them moments of being, and anyone who cares about life on this planet has undoubtedly had them. This shock-receiving capacity, as Woolf described women's vulnerability, is also an asset. These painful realizations about life lead eventually to change, to action. But the kind of depression spawned by the pages of women's magazines bring feelings of worthlessness, of self-disgust. Those prolonged, debilitating depressions do not lead eventually to growth or to action. They lead to tranquilizers, to hospitals, and in some cases, to suicide. There are two important psychological tasks Maggie Scarf discovered in her work on depression that women have to perform throughout their lives if they are to prevent this debilitating kind of depression, the kind that brings feelings of worthlessness. Those two tasks are to grow beyond the unexamined myths of childhood and to adapt, changing attitudes of loss and powerlessness to one of anticipation and action. So how much growing and changing and adapting do women's magazines encourage in their readers today? After checking with the Audit Bureau of Circulation, I discovered that the 10 largest women's magazines were Family Circle, Woman's Day, McCall's, Ladies' Home Journal, Redbook, Cosmopolitan, Glamour, Mademoiselle, Woman's World, and Vogue. Together, they reached a total of 35,384,943 readers every month. That's half of the 65 million women who subscribe to women's magazines. Women's magazines spend thousands of dollars on surveys every year to discover who the readers are, to develop a composite of the average reader, so editorials and advertisements can be directed her way. I spent $16.58 for 10 recent issues to find out who they think we are, to study the reflection of women as it came back to us through 2,793 pages. Judging from the headlines on the cover, the foremost concern of women today is not to grow wiser, but to grow smaller. The average reader, magazines assume, is on a perpetual diet. The cover headlines promised that I would learn how Stephanie Power stays slim and sexy, how I could eat fast food without the calories, whether I needed a body makeover, where do you bulge, sag, ripple, and thicken. There were exercise and diet tips for my over-fat zones, and as well as the 4 hot diets, what's good, what's not. The cruelest cover combined a headline promising prize-winning recipes just below a picture of a freshly baked apple coffee cake so delicious you could almost smell it, with a large headline above that said, "Take 2 inches off your waist." The preoccupation with fat appeared as headlines on 60% of the covers, as articles in 9 out of 10, and as advertisers in 100%. Could this obsession with thinness contribute to women's pervasive depression? A recent study of bulimia, a disorder in which victims force themselves to vomit after eating, would indicate that it does. Alarming reports of bulimia among college-age women have been circulating for some time, and now there are signs that the symptoms of the illness are showing up among 30-year-old executives. The women being treated were by no means fat. They had gained an average of 10 pounds over the year, a normal and healthy weight gain as metabolism slows with age. But the women thought they were eating too much and chalked it up to stress. That isn't stress, Mary Lou Weissman, an author, remarked after reading the study. That's self-loathing. Instead of the thin designer models on the cover of magazines, she said, there should be a picture of a woman in a business suit over a toilet, because that's what some women are actually doing to stay thin. Certainly a picture of an apple coffee cake below a command to take 2 inches off your waist is a subliminal version of the same idea. The contemptuous attitude for bodies that bulge, sag, ripple, and thicken was so pervasive, several magazines suggested surgery to remove these inevitable consequences of age. an article called Keeping Up with Fat Suction Surgery. This is where they vacuum your cellulite out of your body. Featured 7 sets of before and after photos from the files of Beverly Hills plastic surgeon Norman Martin, holding chalkboard identification signs like criminals in mugshots. 7 faceless, naked women bared their incriminating cellulite under chins, stomachs, and hips. I looked at the pictures, and unless these women were measured against the reed-like models on the fashion pages, none of them was fat. The women's weights were well within the normal standards of good health, and their bulges were the natural results of gravity and motherhood. They owned what a woman's body really looks like, if she chose to live long enough, if she chose to bear a child. The obsession with thinness was never labeled clearly as vanity. It masqueraded as health. Celebrities such as Jane Fonda, Cher, Raquel Welch, and Stephanie Powers were authored as health experts to advise readers on how to maintain a 25-year-old physique well past 40. One magazine promised an exercise program to age-proof your body, and in another I learned how to rid myself of underarm sway. That's where you move your arm like this and there's a little jiggle here. Well, before last month, I never understood that underarm sway was a threat to my health. The clear message was that whatever growing and changing a woman must do psychologically to prevent depression, she had better accomplish it in a body that never grew or changed past age 25. And without frowning too much either, for then a woman risked the second greatest fear dominating the pages, wrinkled skin. Only Katharine Hepburn was allowed to show up on the covers with the wrinkles that life had earned for her, and even the independent Hepburn is vulnerable to pervasive scorn for the aging beauty. Her biographers repeatedly reveal that Hepburn does not like to watch herself in her later movies, finding it painful to study herself in age. It's not surprising that a woman would find it painful, since confidence and effectiveness were continually equated with younger-looking skin. The youth confidence equation appeared in several hundred pages of ads promising to fend off wrinkles with anti-aging complexes, age zone protectors, cellular replacement therapy. Again, wrinkled skin was described as healthy skin. Well, if wrinkles are indeed a threat to health, shouldn't the media have been providing as many reports on President Reagan's wrinkles as they did on his colon? And shouldn't Paul Newman take to his bed? Advertisers, not editors, were responsible for many of the anti-aging, anti-fat messages, of course, but readers flipping through a magazine rarely stop to analyze the source. This problem is muddied then when magazines start presenting advertorials, copy that is presented to look like an article, but in fact is paid for by companies supplying the products. Sometimes these are labeled with a small, tiny word at the bottom that says advertisement. Sometimes they're not. Editorial and business departments of a magazine operate like the right and left sides of the brain. Articles creating anxiety about what's wrong with you preceded ads supplying remedies with the product. One feature called Quick Lifts for the Morning Uglies. This was a peculiar form of depression that was only afflicting very young women. Mentioned 7 tips for improving your outlook. 5 of the 7 involved the purchase of a bath gel, a blemish cover, a blusher, a scarf, and a perfume. Since a woman, if she lives to old age, will become wrinkled, will shift in weight, there will always be the need for more treatment. The average reader is not encouraged to look forward to her old self as a woman of achievement, but as a waste. How you look was synonymous with who you are, and for older women, that means invisible. My friend Carolyn Hilburn, who's a professor in Manhattan, said that people are always, she's in her mid-60s, and people are always coming up to her and telling her how wonderful she looks and how young she looks. And she keeps saying, I am not young, I am an older woman with pizzazz, and it's not the same thing. Magazines have had to sell ads to stay in business, of course, but as Mary Lou Weissman pointed out, there are so many more products they could sell us if they would let us grow up. If they'd encourage women to do something besides dressing and undressing, eating and not eating. She mentioned cars, computers. A camera would be nice, she said. Magazines desperately try to purge their subscription lists of readers who are not the yuppies advertisers adore, Carol Rivers, a Boston University journalism professor, said. She said that Best Bagel and boutique journalism spreads like a malevolent weed. Editors grow increasingly impatient with the notion of giving their readers information that will make them uncomfortable. Stories about affirmative action, poverty, the mentally ill, the homeless are just not sexy. Not only does the average reader have to achieve her growing and changing without bulges and wrinkles, but the current purge of serious issues means that she also must proceed without much information. The need to supply the kind of news advertisers like to see accounts for some of the absence of serious essays in women's magazines, but the current moratorium on social issues, and it's real, believe me, stems from editors' desires not to depress their readers. We like our readers to feel happy at the end of an article, an editor explained several years ago. She then described what I've come to think of as the Valium theory of writing, prose that numbs the pain without actually naming the problem. We were discussing agoraphobia at the time, the fear of going out of doors, a kind of depression therapists call the housewife's disease because 95% of its victims are women. My research showed that the symptoms frequently followed a traumatic clash with the outside world, after a mugging, after a rape, and in fact, there was an outbreak of agoraphobia on 3 Mile Island after the nuclear accident there. Therapists had little luck changing the fears of these women because a van with a loudspeaker had driven through the streets with the message, "Close all windows and doors. Mothers, don't breastfeed your babies." After the women received such blunt messages about their radioactive environment, a temporary case of agoraphobia did not seem to me an irrational response. It was a painful learning experience for these women, but one that, if understood, could eventually lead to change. Neither skin creams nor diets would help these women feel better about themselves, and therapy didn't eliminate, quote, exaggerated, unquote, fears. It made sense that agoraphobia couldn't be cured by rearranging the woman, since the root of the problem was out there. The only lasting relief, my research found, was when these women connected with like-minded people and drafted plans for political or community action. The solution advocating social action did not meet the magazine's requirements because it would, quote, take too long, the editor said. Surveys indicated that the average reader liked how-to features, especially how-tos that would solve a problem by next Wednesday. The Valium theory, with its quick fix approach, permeated the pages of recent issues. How to stop the one you love from drinking. Loving ways to talk out anything so your marriage wins. How not to look and feel tired. The subtitle said, "Do you envy women who always seem to have boundless energy? Well, you won't have to anymore. Here are the health and beauty secrets that will make you one of the lucky megawatt people." There is hardly a problem in America that the average reader can't somehow solve with a health or beauty technique. A cold, a quarrel, a night on the town, all leave their mark, one copy said. Beauty trickery can cure what ails you. The beauty tricks recommended made the sad-looking woman in the before photo look decidedly more cheerful in the after, But can a cold, a quarrel, or a hangover really be cured by mascara? Is a compact of translucent powder a good defense against radioactivity? What really struck me when I read the contents of women's magazines was the level of lying, said science writer Casey Cole. 3 steps to a happy marriage. Lose 25 pounds in 2 weeks. Cures for drugs, acne, and loneliness. None of these problems, she said, can be solved in 3 steps. The lies are degrading and infuriating. The quick fix formula pared down the truth so leanly that the average reader has mostly half-truths to direct her growth and change. In addition to the lying, Cole observed, the articles speak to us as if women are extremely simple-minded. Problems are cast in terms of before and after, do and don't, yes and no. There are rarely shades of gray, rarely, sometimes, rarely, maybes. It's the language a mother uses with a very small child, not women dealing with tremendously complex issues. Instead of providing new information to debunk old myths, the how-tos and half-truths merely created more. Motherhood was also presented as either so easy that any celebrity who'd been a mother for 2 minutes was qualified to tell us how to do it. I remember Marie Osmond smiling out from a magazine cover a few years ago with advice about bringing up a happy family. Since she was still a baby mother herself, it would still be another 10 to 20 years before her thoughts could possibly gel on motherhood. Yet it was persistently celebrities and experts, not mothers with wrinkles and bulges, who give readers advice. The contempt for readers was based in part on the composite drawn from the surveys, the advertising dummy made up of all women, but exactly like none. The average reader may have 2.5 children, but no real women do. The average reader may strive for a body like Jane Fonda's, but most real women live in bodies like Irma Bombeck and Betty Friedan. Most of the myths about youth and beauty are based on the childish expectations of the average reader who is a myth herself. While most editors don't identify with the average reader, she's still viewed as a role model for all of the women out there. I'll never forget a conversation I had when I was still living in Fort Wayne, Indiana, with a Manhattan editor who said that the article I had turned in was, she said, well, you can understand this and I can understand this, but the average reader will never understand this. And I said, you know, trust me, I have met the average reader and she is us. When I became a freelance writer, now it's 12 years ago, a veteran writer I admired advised me not to waste my good writing in women's magazines. I should save it for books, she said. It made no sense to labor carefully over words, she said, because you'll be rewritten, the politics will be purged, and expert opinions will be added to tell the readers what they already know. Try not to care about these things, she said. You'll wear yourself out. Well, all of these things have happened by now, and I tried not to care. But I found myself still caring a little too passionately during a lunch with an editor some months ago when I launched into a lengthy monologue about who the reader was. I said there wasn't any issue too controversial or too depressing to bring up with women readers if we'd only invest them with some intelligence, if we'd only believe in them. Do you know how readers look at magazines? The editor interrupted me flatly. She then pantomimed a scene, flipping the pages, where a reader stops now and then to admire a lipstick, to envy a nail polish. She interpreted these reading habits as proof of women's short attention span. She didn't assume that there might be nothing worthwhile to read in the magazine. Well, why should editors, writers, and readers keep on caring about the messages that filter through their magazines? If women in our culture have any rooms of their own, then magazines are those rooms. The former editor-in-chief of Redbook, Cy Chasler, once said, "Do they serve as sources of power and movement? They did in the past, and not so long ago. In July 1976, led by Chancellor and other concerned editors, every women's magazine in the nation agreed to publish the complete text of the Equal Rights Amendment, along with articles about it. This action was repeated again in November 1979, when the ERA needed an extension of time. Many of us, discouraged by the loss of ratification, were at least encouraged that magazines had at least finally come into their own power, Chancellor said. They turned disregard for the ERA, a primary women's issue, into majority support for it. They had opened almost all of the other vital issues of the day, from daycare to divorce to health concerns to Social Security inequities. If we had continued that tradition, we would not today have the Supreme Court that we have, which is going to carry us well into the next millennium. It happened because we were all asleep, and we saw it coming. As a late physicist, Frank Oppenheimer once explained to his students, "We don't live in the real world, we live in a world we made up." The world made up for women through 2,793 pages of magazines that I collected in 1 month was this: 40-year-old bodies can look like 25 if women would only try hard enough. If anti-aging formulas fail to keep wrinkles off women's skin, surgery is available. Marriage can be saved in 3 easy steps, and motherhood takes 2 minutes to learn. There are few signs of life outside the United States, except in Paris. And if women feel depressed over any of this, they probably need more blusher. Instead of encouraging women to grow beyond childish myths and adapt to the changes of life, women's magazines have readers running in place, exhausted. The anxieties and depression instilled by these magazines have risen so high, executive women are inducing nausea, and healthy women are submitting to surgery. This is the world we've made up for women, and it's a perilous place to exist. Well, let's open up for questions. I'm thinking too now, the most recent health issues that's bombarded in women's magazines is the whole silicone breast implants, and the fact that this investigative journalism should have been going on for 30 years. I just was doing an interview with a bioethicist at Montefiore Hospital in Manhattan who was on the breast implant panel for the FDA, and she said memos have come out now, internal company memos that have indicated they've known for years that this silicone gel was leaking out of the implants. There was directions to the people in the warehouse that they should wipe off the slimy surfaces before it was shipped. So before these were even inserted into women's bodies, they were already leaking. Now we're looking at the permanent long-term damages of it, and we think probably there are 2 million women in this country that have such silicone implants. You know, but women's magazines won't deal with these issues because it might be depressing. When Newsday published a version of this story on the cover of their Sunday magazine, they wanted to do a mock-up of Cosmo or one of the magazines and put a sexy woman on the cover and call it Fluff. And so the whole editorial staff sat around trying to make up fake headlines. And they came up with things like, "Is your hairstyle hurting your marriage?" "If your nose job wasn't enough." 10 scrumptious desserts that will flatten your tummy. Really? Our second annual guide to lip gloss. On and on. Men, why they're better than us. On and on. John Montorio, the editor, read them over the phone to me, and I laughed, and I said, "But John, you know, you can hardly satirize these magazines. There will actually be readers who say, 'Oh, where is that story? I want to look that one up.'" You know, it's hard to believe. What questions do you have? I have obviously other comments and more notes to make, but I would love to have your questions and see what's on your minds. Yes?
What do you think of Lear's magazine?
Ah,
First came out.
mixing memory with desire.
I thought there were going to be more realistic older women featured, and it seems like they're also very.
Yeah, it's so sad. I think it's a tragedy. I started out as a contributing editor with Lear's, and I think they had a wonderful idea. Frances Lear came to town from Hollywood and said, you know, you're first of all, she said to advertisers, you're missing your most your most well-financed consumer by ignoring middle-aged women. These are women with power, these are women with budgets, these are women with money. And she vowed at the time that she would not put any woman in the magazine, a model, who was under 40. The magazine was first called Lear's, for the woman who wasn't born yesterday. And they wanted to run intelligent articles about social issues, about the arts, and it's hard for me to explain what happened there. I was with the magazine for 2.5 years, and then I just finally had to leave. I got editorial comments back like, we really love this issue, but there's too much writing in it. I said, what? Meaning like, go straight to the how-to. Part of it was the financial stress of a recession as the magazine started to shrink, and magazines depend on the number of ad pages they have in each issue. As the magazine started to shrink, the articles had to be shorter. As advertisers demanded more in terms of the number of subscriptions, we had to put more celebrities on the cover. So the initial covers were all anonymous older women. And then you went inside and found the fascinating story of why this woman ended up on the cover. Well, after that, it was only Hollywood actresses with facelifts over 40 that were on the cover. And of course, because it was marketed to women over 40, all of the wrinkle removing companies were intensely interested in this audience. And so in order for them to buy an ad, they wanted to make sure that there was going to be an article that talked about taking care of your skin. And so the social issues, again, started dwindling to keep those ads, which is why Ms., you know, when it came back in its third incarnation here, decided to go without ads. I wish we had done that when we were still a collective. I'm still with Ms. too. I wish that we had done it when we were still women-owned, but this happened under Lang Communications. Yeah.
Well, how did the readers respond to the change in content?
With Lear's, they started dropping their subscriptions. So I expect the magazine to fold in the next 12 months. This is my prediction.
Tell the publishers anything?
Well, I think that they couldn't find another funding source outside of advertisers, and as long as you're locked into that financial marriage where, you know, like it's like to buy the magazine, the cover lines give you some worry. It's like the formula is, on the cover we'll give you some worry, inside we'll soothe. So it's worry, soothe, worry, soothe. So the cover lines, I remember having a huge fight with them about, this was it. I had written, they had asked me to write an essay about, you know, male midlife crisis and what it is like for women who are living with a man who's going through one. It's like a depression doesn't take place in a vacuum. It spreads to a family, it spreads to a couple. And so this was an essay to explore what are the issues for women. What are you know, what things should women be aware of? What temptations to get in there and try and fix everything have to be resisted? How to take care of yourself when you're living with someone who is depressed. You know, depressions can be contagious. So what headline did they put on this? And then we went through like 3 rewrites, you know, both of us fighting, you know, back and forth about what should go in. What headline did they put on it? You know, this was to say to women, you can still have your own self-esteem even if temporarily your mate does not. The cover line, the headline that was put on the cover was, women who nurture too much. So it's like blaming women again for a depression. In this case, that's not even their own. And in fact, the whole article described exactly the opposite behavior, that women did well in this situation when they did not nurture too much. So it's like, well, that's okay, because we're so used to insulting women, and women are so used to being insulted that it doesn't matter. So, yeah, I don't know what will happen. Now, Ms. is an interesting experiment for the for the publishing community to have witnessed, because nobody believed it would survive a year without ads, based only on subscriptions, and they charge much more for 6 issues a year. But it's a good read. People have been giving this to friends as gifts. People have not minded paying more money to get real news and real writing, and so it's working. I remember in the old days, when we were still in our old building in Times Square, we would sit around at the editorial meetings, and there was really always an earnest effort there to say, okay, look, we know the realities of the publishing business. Every month we would get tremendous volume of mail from readers who hated to see us running ads for tobacco or alcohol, and they would say, why aren't you a politically correct magazine? And we said, because, advertisers are not politically correct, and if we don't get the advertisers, you don't get the stories. But it was always tough, and advertisers didn't like Ms. anyway because, we didn't run beauty ads. We would work really hard to get car ads. But we had one issue one year. I had been campaigning very heavily for us to do an issue on women's spirituality, because I'd been hearing lots of things from lots of quarters, of what women who had left patriarchal religions did to replace those rituals, how it's terribly difficult to leave a religion without leaving a family. What were the California witches doing? What were the Michigan nuns doing who had defected from the Sisters of Mercy? There were a million stories about spirituality. This was in the late 80s when, before we entered the New Age. And so we did that. We commissioned all of these articles from all of these interesting writers all over the country, and we got more mail on that issue than we had on any of the previous 36 issues. And so it bombed with advertisers because they said, religion doesn't sell cars. What are you talking about? So we took a loss on it. We took a loss on that issue, but it had gotten such a huge volume of mail that from then on, in the editorial meetings, we referred to that issue as the reader's issue. So that meant, what were the other 11 issues each year that we were putting out? Those were the advertisers' issues. So it gets very complicated. Other questions? Yeah.
What would you suggest should be done, being that, well, at least from my perspective, it seems like throughout the planet there are things being commercialized and commodified, that perhaps these things will only worsen. What do you think should be done to combat that?
Good question, and it's true. I think you're right. I was so appalled as I watched this whole country just move irrevocably towards greed and materialism, and part of it is because of this, and part of it's because we keep buying it. I think it's terrifically important to be conscious of what you're taking in, both on the printed page and in any other version of the media. And it also does matter to write letters to the editor. They have a formula within the editorial offices for every letter they receive, 9 other people felt the same way but didn't have time to write. So every time you send a letter to a magazine, you're writing for 10 people, and it counts heavily there, because not as many, obviously far more people write than what you read in the letters to the editor. But they regard that as very important direct information. Their marketing department does pay attention to it. Here's an example. I was also contributing editor for Vogue. I just have slept around all over Manhattan. I was writing for Vogue and Ms. at the same time. It's like true schizophrenia. But in fact, I had tremendous editorial freedom at Vogue to write about issues like sexual harassment and the homeless and mentally ill, because their reader surveys indicated that only 15% of their subscribers actually read the articles. So they didn't give a flying fuck what we put in there. They just said, let's just get the pictures out here and you just do whatever you want on those printed words. Well, I worked with a very good editor there, Amy Gross, who's now at Mirabella. Mirabella is going to be an interesting magazine to watch if it can stay alive through the recession. But Amy and I, this was in the early days of the women's movement too, in the 80s, and she had been asking me for some time to write an essay about the whole issue of child pornography, which was then exploding. And I said, right, I'll put it on our list of issues that we keep cooking on. And as soon as I get the story, the lead, the event, the scenario that snaps it, I'll do that. So I got my April '84 issue of Vogue, and I was flipping through it, and I came to a portrait of Jessica Lange, who was in a photo spread modeling gowns by the designer Ungaro. And in a few of those photographs, her little then baby, Shura, was pictured with her. Shura was 2 years old and absolutely gorgeous, absolutely beautiful, and also perfectly naked. Now, in one of those photos, Jessica Lange is crouched down behind Shura, and she has her arm around her. All you can see of the dress she's modeling is from the elbow to the wrist. The rest of her is crouched down behind this baby. And in her other hand, she's holding, this photograph, by the way, it's important to know, was done by Bert Stern, who did the last photos of Marilyn Monroe. He's the one that brought the cases of Dom Perignon to her, got her drunk, did the last photos, and that's what went into the book. So he's also a very, very, very famous, well-established, and high-priced New York photographer. She's holding these long-stemmed irises that are coming to rest, these long phallic stems, right in the baby's genital area. She's exposed full front to the camera, this girl baby. And the whole atmosphere of the photo is beautiful blonde hair, gorgeous flowers, pink and green satin ribbons, and in the center of the photo, that baby's genitals and those long stems. I got on the phone and I said, Amy, I'm ready to write that article on child pornography, and I'm going to use this as my lead. And she said, I've never censored you, which she never had, but she said, if you write this article, I can't promise that I'll get it published. I said, will you promise me that everyone responsible for that photograph will read what I write? She said, promise. I said, okay, let's do it, let's go. So we did. So the next day, she calls me up and says, have you started writing this yet? I said, of course not, it's just the next day. And she said, wait, because I'm going to Federal Express you the mail we got today. In one day, they got 560 letters about one page in a magazine. That is a powerful response. She sent me these letters, and I sat down with a stack of mail, 560 letters, and I was prepared to be really depressed reading all of this mail about what readers' responses to that photograph. It was amazing. These were beauticians in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, school teachers in Alabama. These are not even necessarily people who were like movers and shakers in the women's movement, and they did not miss a thing about what the meaning of this photograph was. And they got a lot of canceled subscriptions. And it was a beautiful photograph. All of the readers acknowledged that. They all felt defensive. I am not a prude, but they said, this is a dangerous photograph. What can that mother be thinking, that she let this go out into the public. And my thinking is, in the studios of Manhattan, Jessica Lange didn't even see what that picture looked like through the lens of the camera. What she saw was her beautiful, beautiful 2-year-old baby, whom she sees nude all the time. And the other thing is, nudity is such a fact of the photographing studios that you just don't notice it anymore. But anyway, the article did not get published, but what I did was I quoted little wonderful parts of all of these letters and put it together in an article, and it did circulate, and all of the women wanted to publish it, and the art director, who was then Alex Lieberman, said, no way are we going to criticize ourselves in our own magazine. So it didn't get published, but the good thing that happened was the next month's fashion photo spread. Vogue was famous in those days for picturing women in dog collars, and it was Helmut. What's his name? How can I forget? Helmut Neiman? If I could remember it, you would recognize. He's a very famous photographer too. Anyway, the photo spread came in, and this time it